Hello, and welcome to episode 107 of Prose. This week, indulge in an extra hour every day when the rest of the world stops, and experience the love of a son for his mother in 17th century Japan. Today's episode is coming out a day early in honor of my own mother's birthday. So, happy birthday, Mom. Rather than drone on about all the usual things I drone on about, I'll ask again that all of you out there in the wider world continue to take care of one another and potentially, maybe, possibly consider telling someone about our journeys together. Do engage with me through social media. I love it when you make contact. The handle across all platforms is @ProsePodcast. Thanks for listening. Let's get to the tales, shall we? This week we have The 25th Hour and The Aged Mother by Matsuo Basho. Enjoy. The 25th Hour, an original short story by Jared I. McGee.
And indeed, there will be time for the yellow smoke that slides along the street, rubbing its back upon the window panes. There will be time. There will be time to prepare a face to meet the faces that you meet. There will be time to murder and create, and time for all the works and days of hands that lift and drop a question on your plate. Time for you and time for me, and time yet for 100 indecisions, and for 100 visions and revisions before the taking of toast and tea.
Sean Grazier sat at his usual table at Ethel's. The diner smelled of its usual coffee smell. Not the deep, earthy aroma of those dime-a-dozen frou-frou coffee houses. Ethel's kept their walls bathed in the sour, burnt tang that only 24/7 diners, lonely truck stops, and underfunded police precincts could ever truly achieve. He snorted after taking a swig of his cupful. The coffee was swill, but he was long accustomed to that. His ill-timed chuckle snuck out because of his insistence on continuing to call Ethel's a 24/7 joint. Old habits die hard. Amused by his own thoughts and wiping the coffee spittle from his chin, Grazier looked up to see Diana already coming through the door and walking toward him. Damn, he thought. He'd been sitting there for hours, and this woman chose to walk in while he was dribbling coffee out of his nose. Of course she did. Grazier? Sky? You always frequent the most humble establishments, don't you? Gets the job done. You never change, do you? She sighed as she sat down, putting her elegantly manicured fingers in the air to signal the waitress to come over. A stalky, gray-haired woman with a distinctive Midwestern accent asked, "What'll it be, dearie?" Ah, Jeannie. She was a fixture here. Despite 25 years in Brooklyn, she never had lost that accent. Tea. Earl Grey, organic if you have it. No cream, no sugar. Hot water and a tea bag, okay? It will do. Thank you, cooed Diana. Having known both of these women for years, seeing the two interact for the first time was fascinating to him. Jeannie was nonplussed by the exotic request, but she was standoffish toward Diana, a new face that didn't fit in with the Ethel's crowd at all. At 5'10", but 6'1" in her sharp black heels that matched her black pencil skirt and tight, almost iridescent black button-up shirt, Diana had strode into Ethel's with an air of royalty and what most of the diner probably thought of as aloofness. For her part, Diana was displeased with the poor man's tea option she was going to have to choke down on his account. But she didn't show it to Jeannie. Diana may be high class and worldly, and a touch dangerous to boot, but she was not rude. He knew her well enough to see past the purring pussycat response, though. Jeannie was quick with the tea and gave Grazier an "I've got your back" look as she refilled his coffee. Then they were left relatively alone as the clock ticked toward 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. "You sure didn't give us much room to work with, Sky." "Pish posh, darling. We, more than most, have time to spare." Her wide smile let out a jingly giggle, her soft laughter melding with the golden bracelets and dangling earrings that shook with her mirth. "Real funny. So, since you showed, you've got the bead on the new Li Xiao?" "Breathe easy, Grazier. There's only one of them in town, and she isn't one of their best. You'd almost think that they weren't taking us seriously." Again with the quirked lips turning up and accompanying jingling. "Look, you might find this all very amusing, but I don't have the time, support, or background to be able to take a huntress so damn lightly, darling. So please excuse me if I'm deadly serious about this whole situation. We've got under 2 hours before we need to move, and here we sit in my favorite diner having chummy conversation. What is the plan?" He said, clipping his speech at the end to emphatically insist that she lay out their next steps in avoiding him dying tonight. He hoped that was emphatic insistence. Knowing Sky, she would probably either take it as light-hearted joviality or veiled flirting. Either would be met with her inscrutable toothy smiles and keep calm and carry-on attitude. "Look, Grazier, Sean, when we hit the 25th hour tonight, we'll stroll out of this charming establishment quietly, unassumingly, and we will make our way to our safe house for tonight. We'll look back on our little date here as just another halcyon evening we were blessed to share. Let's just take the moment to enjoy my tea, and we'll dive in once I've sipped for a moment. All right, love?" Halcyon evening. He'd had to look up that damned word the last time she'd made a nearly identical comment. Oddly enough, the online dictionary had told him it also referred to some bird from mythology that would sing and calm the wind and waves with its avian charms, allowing it to nest on the ocean surface during winter solstices, a time when the seas would usually be even more volatile than normal. Grazier thought that maybe Sky here was one of those Hallisons herself, always smoothing out situations with her velveteen reassurances. He looked back up at Ethel's clock. Between catching up, polite conversation, and now this back and forth, he and Sky were down to 1 hour. Sky's absolute lack of urgency made him start to sweat. 3 a.m. Soul's midnight, the time when bodies gave up their spirits willingly to move toward whatever, if anything, came next. The time when the purest truths are spoken. That's when suicides spike. Death comes lurking, the witching hour, the broken sleep, the liminal doorway, the bending time. But also, then came the 25th hour. The new Li Xiao were taught that 3 a.m. is when the body's meridians all align, just right to rejuvenate the flesh and repair any fraying to the soul. This is why they saw the waking as threats. They got to move beyond the needs of the flesh and operate in the 25th hour outside of time to those unable to tap into that liminal time and hover in the threshold between today and yesterday, today and tomorrow. The new Li Xiao considered the waking as something akin to a zombie, monsters from folk tales and myths that needed to be put down. Escaping the ravages of time and death, even if only in brief nightly stints, was unnatural and therefore wrong, an abomination. From what little Grazier had picked up from his wanderings and pieced together from Sky's often cryptic explanations, the waking were nothing new, but they were rather rare. Writings describing people who would walk with gods in the small hours go back into early Tamil and Sanskrit. The Waking, who were the scholarly types, even pointed to early Aboriginal cave work as referencing these walkers beyond time. He thought all that was a bit presumptuous. He knew all of that was of absolutely no use to him in avoiding this most recent Nu Li Shao that was on his tail. She would snuff him out whether the annals of history really did hold keys to the 25th hour or not. That's what he was focused on. History could wait. It wasn't going anywhere. Sky was going on about the historical cultivation of Earl Grey or some such, breeding, crossbreeding of plants and the like, and Grazier's mind wandered again. The science behind what happened to him every night at 3 a.m. was beyond him. Theories about hypothalamic oversensitivity. Theories about circadian rhythms resonating with the right frequency to match or mismatch with temporal patterns. Theories about how a natural, internal process that regulates the sleep-wake cycle goes askew, causing biological processes to upend their endogenous, entrainable oscillation from a 24-hour rhythm to a 25-hour rhythm. All of that science talk about how the Waking defied biological truisms down to cyanobacteria made Grazier's head spin. But he took a touch more interest in the science than the history, knowing that it might feasibly hold some answers to keeping himself alive in the face of being hunted and in the wake of his own body's rebellion against the biological realities of the world. Not to mention, he wanted to know why the hell the 25th hour shifted along with time zones. It didn't work perfectly or precisely, but it was always damn close. Supposedly, it was something to do with the poles and magnetization, but just like jet lag, it fascinated him how all that played out. At the end of the day, no one knew anything for certain anyway. History or science, fantasy or reality, the Waking just knew they got an extra hour outside of what everyone else around them experienced. Grazier snickered. Damned if the world wasn't lucky there weren't more of them. The havoc a few hundred people with an extra hour outside of the masses' temporal reality would make for some very real temptations to enrich and empower oneself. Just a handful of them, though. What's so funny? Why are you tittering to yourself over there? I'm assuming it wasn't about my divine laying out of the thrills of bergamot, oolong kimun, and the Reform Bill of 1832. Oh yeah, sorry, Sky. I was just drifting, thinking back on what little historical and scientific touchpoints we have for us. I know how thrilled you are about all of that, sweet, she said with sugary sarcasm. Look, just because I don't find it immediately relevant doesn't mean I don't find it interesting. I just want to keep my head on my shoulders and heart in my chest. So, all of that history and science, and you haven't honed in on what we know about the Nu Li Shao. Grazier humphed out while sipping on his now cold coffee, his eyes widening. Oh, Grazier, surely you must know that if those Waking that came before us kept records and tried to trace down historical and biological truisms, putting them down for posterity and our benefit, that they would be eagerly researching any and all avenues leading to the Nu Li Shao as well. I guess, but we've never really spoken in depth about them. We've never spoken in depth about them because you are always playing hopscotch with your hideaways and never want to take a moment to sit back and receive for once. For a man with more time in his life than most of our poor fellow mortals, you like to rush a lot. Impatience has clogged your ears the few times I've tried to enlighten you with some of what we now know about the Nu Li Shao. Well, then enlighten me. It's 2:25. We've got 35 minutes to bide our time before we can make the move. So long as that huntress bitch doesn't come barreling in before then, we're golden. Might as well learn something while we wait. Right? How civilized, Grazier. Maybe you are learning to be a bit more of a cultured gentleman after all. Grazier rolled his eyes and made a circling, "Get on with it" motion with his hands. Well, I'm sorry to disappoint, but we don't know too terribly much about the Order, if an Order even is what they are. As you do already know, the Huntresses are just that. Women trained to sniff out the waking and terminate us. Why women? No one has been able to suss that out just yet either, I fear. Maybe they have some sort of hormonal sensitivity to the odd temporal scent we have? Maybe they have some sort of empathetic frequency that hums because of the oddness of a waking's hypothalamus. The bottom line is that we just don't know. We do know, however, that they are referenced across cultures and times just as we are, from the earliest Tamil writings where they are the Vatakaran, to the more modern Albanian Yatare. The new Li Xiao have been around for every step of the way alongside the waking. I mention the Albanian connection because, as I'm certain you've noticed, we have seen a much larger number of huntresses coming out of the Balkans. The natural question is why, and the answer we both get sick of hearing is the answer we have here. We just don't know. Grazier sniffed derisively at that. With all the extra hours, all the waking across all of time had, you'd think they could have put together a more comprehensive history, or at least something like a field manual to help their people stand a better chance at survival. So, with all the Balkan new Li Xiao, why is the group's name Chinese? Yet another murky area I fear, dear Grazier. Basically, we think they first organized under Chinese Shang emperors before moving westward. The Order seems to have adopted the name and never leaned away from it, despite its expansion shifting from China as the locus of its power. 2:49 a.m. Grazier shook his head a bit. Well, that is all interesting, Sky. I'm not saying it isn't, but you tried to give me history lessons in science labs 100 times before. I hate to ask, but this isn't why we are meeting here. Neither is one new Li Xiao with the craving for me. You could have warned me 100 ways, but... He shrugged his shoulders up, waiting. Hitomi. Marosajo Tore. No. When? Last week, Toronto. How? What do you want me to say, Grazier? They were hunted down like animals and dispatched. How? MSSR from 300 meters. A Filipino rifle? That doesn't make any sense. And in Canada? What the hell, Sky? Listen, I know that Hitomi and Ture were your friends. They were my siblings in all this absurdity. Why weren't they warned? There was a huntress in Toronto. We didn't know, Grazier. We didn't know. Grazier and Sky let that declaration linger in the air, impregnating the silence with anger and fear and mourning. Together they looked up at the diner's clock. 2:58 a.m. 120 seconds was more than enough to squeeze off 2 rounds and bury them both. But sitting there in Ethel's, that was unlikely. 2:59 a.m. Down to 60 seconds. Here it came. 3 a.m. Soul's midnight. The time when bodies gave up their spirits willingly to move toward whatever, if anything, came next. The time when the purest truths are spoken. The time when suicides spike and death comes lurking. The witching hour, the broken sleep, the liminal doorway, the bending time, the 25th hour. Grazier? Yeah, Sky, he replied with a voice still rough with emotion. We will make it right. You know we will make it right. Down to 30 seconds. Let's make sure we do, eh? I think it's time we go disturb the universe. Poetry? From you, Grazier? I read from time to time. 3 a.m. The world around them slowed and blurred. Granger and Sky stood, stretched their arms and legs from having sat so long in a rock-hard diner booth, and began to make their way to the door. Granger paused before exiting Ethel's, going back to their table, adding an extra 20 to the money they'd already left to pay for the coffee and tip Jeannie, and drawing a smiley face with a hastily scrawled, "Had to run. Sorry. See you in no time," for the older waitress.
In a minute there is time for decisions and revisions, which a minute will reverse.
Thank you for listening to The 25th Hour, an original short story by me, Jared I. McGee, and original premise by Justin L. McGee. Please stick around for a special short story. I am dedicating this next story to my mother, as it is her birthday today. So let's head over to the tale and experience a slice of historical Japan. The Aged Mother by Matsuo Basho. Long, long ago, there lived at the foot of the mountain a poor farmer and his aged, widowed mother. They owned a bit of land which supplied them with food, and they were humble, peaceful, and happy. Shining was governed by a despotic leader who, though a warrior, had a great and cowardly shrinking from anything suggestive of failing health and strength. This caused him to send out a cruel proclamation. The entire province was given strict orders to immediately put to death all aged people. Those were barbarous days, and the custom of abandoning old people to die was not uncommon. The poor farmer loved his aged mother with tender reverence, and the order filled his heart with sorrow. But no one ever thought twice about obeying the mandate of the governor. So, with many deep and hopeless sighs, the youth prepared for what at the time was considered the kindest mode of death. Just at sundown, when his day's work was ended, he took a quantity of unwhitened rice, which was the principal food for the poor, and he cooked, dried it, and tied it in a square cloth, which he swung in a bundle around his neck along with a gourd filled with cool, sweet water. Then he lifted his helpless old mother to his back and started on his painful journey up the mountain. The road was long and steep. The narrow road was crossed and recrossed by many paths made by the hunters and woodcutters. In some places, they lost and confused, but he gave no heed. One path or another, it mattered not. On he went, climbing blindly upward, ever upward, towards the high bare summit of what is known as Obatsuyama, the mountain of the abandoning of the aged. The eyes of the old mother were not so dim, but they noted the reckless hastening from one path to another, and her loving heart grew anxious. Her son did not know the mountain's many paths, and his return might be one of danger. So she stretched forth her hand, and snapping the twigs from brushes as they passed, she quietly dropped a handful every few steps of the way so that as they climbed, the narrow path behind them was dotted at frequent intervals with tiny piles of twigs. At last, the summit was reached. Weary and heartsick, the youth gently released his burden and silently prepared a place of comfort as his last duty to the loved one. Gathering fallen pine needles, he made a soft cushion and tenderly lifted his old mother onto it. He wrapped her padded coat more closely about the stooping shoulders and with tearful eyes and an aching heart, he said farewell. The trembling mother's voice was full of unselfish love as she gave her last injunction.
"Let not thine eyes be blinded, my son,"
she said.
"The mountain road is full of dangers. Look carefully and follow the path which holds the piles of twigs. They will guide you to the familiar path farther down."
The son's surprised eyes looked back over the path, then at the poor old shriveled hands all scratched and soiled by their work of love. His heart broke within, and bowing to the ground, he cried aloud, "O honorable mother, your kindness breaks my heart. I will not leave you. Together we will follow the path of twigs, and together we will die." Once more, he shouldered his burden. How light it seemed now. And hastened down the path, through the shadows and the moonlight, to the little hut in the valley. Beneath the kitchen floor was a walled closet for food, which was covered and hidden from view. There, the son hid his mother, supplying her with everything she needed, continually watching and fearing she would be discovered. Time passed, and he was beginning to feel safe when again the governor sent forth heralds bearing an unreasonable order, seemingly as a boast of his power. His demand was that his subjects should present him with a rope of ashes. The entire province trembled with dread. The order must be obeyed, yet who in all shining could make a rope of ashes? One night, in great distress, the son whispered the news to his hidden mother.
"Wait," she said. I will think.
On the second day, she told him what to do.
"Make a rope of twisted straw,"
she said.
"Then stretch it up a row of flat stones and burn it on a windless night."
He called the people together and did as she said, and when the blaze died down, there upon the stones, with every twist and fiber showing perfectly, lay a rope of ashes. The governor was pleased at the wit of the youth and praised greatly, but he demanded to know where he obtained his wisdom. "Alas, alas," cried the farmer, "the truth must be told." And with a deep bow, he related his story. The governor listened and then meditated in silence. Finally, he lifted his head.
"Shining needs more than strength of youth,"
he said gravely.
"Ah, that I should have forgotten the well-known saying, 'With crown of snow there cometh wisdom.'"
That very hour, the cruel law was abolished, and the custom drifted into as far a past that only legends remain. Thank you for listening to The Aged Mother, an original take on a Japanese folk story by Matsuo Basho, a famous poet and essayist from the 17th century Japan. All music and sound effects you have heard throughout episode 107 come from YouTube's royalty-free audio library, the alwaysamazingfreesound.org, or are my own creations. Everything that is not my own is being used under CC 01.0 Universal Public Domain Dedication licenses. In case you all hadn't noticed, this episode came out one day early. That is purposeful, and I would like to dedicate this short story to my own mother on her birthday. Don't you worry, I'm not abandoning you on any mountains anytime soon, Mom. Happy birthday. That does it for Prose this week. Our next full episode will come in 2 weeks' time, as always. Please do consider sharing the podcast with someone you think might enjoy these bi-weekly journeys together. Even more importantly now, amid these continued scary times we are living in, please, as you continue about your day, I hope that you'll remember to love those around you, tell them that you do, and embrace this life as it is, always, stranger than fiction. Thanks for listening.